Good day to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather outlook for July 10th, 2026. And today, we're going to talk about El Nino, as it is looking like we are already approaching record-breaking territory with this El Nino. And you've probably very well known for the past few months the hype around this incoming El Nino event, and it's already here. And the forecasts and all the expectations that this El Nino event was going to be a record-breaking event, once seemed far-fetched, is now looking increasingly likely that it is going to become reality. In fact, in many ways, given today's current sea surface temperatures, we might already be facing the reality of a super record-breaking El Nino event. And I'm going to go over why. I'm going to show you some interesting stats, and of course, you've probably seen them by now, but we're also going to take a look at the latest climate models which have come out for the month of July over the past week or so as the month has started, and it just looks increasingly likely that this El Nino is going to be one unlike anything we've ever seen, at least in recent history, probably eclipsing the most recent significant El Nino events of the last 25 to 30 years. So, with that being said, let's start off by taking a look at how things are looking like right now, sea surface temperature anomaly-wise, in the Pacific and across the globe. And starting off here in the Pacific, just incredible the magnitude of sea surface temperature anomalies that we have right now, all along the equator here, stretching all the way from the coast of Central America westward, pretty much into the western central, even approaching the western Pacific now, where we have sea surface temperature anomaly shadings of at least 2 degrees Celsius. And you're even starting to see the pockets of shadings of 3 beginning to pop up as well, further to the west here too, even approaching the eastern central Pacific region as well. Still mostly in the eastern Pacific, but all of these extreme anomalies here are already beginning to shade in along the equatorial Pacific, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these 3 Celsius anomalies even make it further west and also approach the central and western Pacific as well. But this is as classic of a strong to super El Nino look as you can get, and I mean, it's just incredible that pretty much the entire tropical Pacific here is warm, stretching all the way from the eastern even out west into the western Pacific, except for the fact that we have these cooler anomalies here, which is actually associated with the strong Typhoon Bavi, that made its trek here across the western Pacific over the last few days, and naturally, because of that, it leaves a cool wake in response, but that's typical of tropical cyclones. In fact, the natural kind of purpose for tropical cyclones is to balance the oceans, to take heat from the ocean and dispense it out into the atmosphere. As crazy and as, dangerous and devastating tropical cyclones are, in a way you could say that they are important to nature, and especially with all the heat here in the tropical Pacific, that's definitely going to lead to lots of tropical activity, more than likely here. And I touched upon this yesterday, especially when it comes to the eastern Pacific, but I'll show you again later today. And again, with the sea surface temperature anomalies here in the Nino 3.4, the latest value as of yesterday, officially at 2 degrees Celsius. We are now at 2.019, so basically right on the dot at 2 degrees Celsius here in the Nino 3.4. So you could say that with the daily sea surface temperatures, we are now officially at Super El Nino intensity. And the warmest waters are still probably yet to come, because the Nino 1 and 2 region, the region here close to South America, which has had the warmest values in terms of sea surface temperature anomalies, that remains above 3 degrees Celsius right now. So once again, if you want to assume that all of these warm waters here further to the east in the Pacific will continue to make their way westward, probably in just a matter of a few weeks here, the Nino 3.4 might get close to, and in fact probably hit 3 degrees Celsius. So all of those forecasts of a record-breaking 3 degrees Celsius El Nino definitely appear to be on track verifying right now. In fact, I'll show you the fact that we are already breaking records right now as we speak, and I'll show you that in just a little bit. The SOI dashboard, definitely also in tandem with the strong El Nino right now, and as I've said before, the SOI kind of is a measure of the pressure patterns in the Pacific, and that's probably the best way we can look at a tool that'll help us determine whether or not we are actually seeing an atmospheric response that is in correlation with the El Nino we have right now. And to be honest with you, in order for us to be able to get as strong of an El Nino as we are going to get, the atmosphere responding and actually behaving alongside the strong El Nino is very important. And right now, we are definitely seeing that the case. The latest daily contribution to the SOI is at negative 19, almost negative 20. And the 30-day average of the SOI itself was at negative 22, almost negative 33 today. And even the 90-day average, too, is at negative 16. So all of the SOI values here are very negative, meaning the atmosphere is perfectly responding and perfectly coupled with the El Nino right now. And that's just going to allow this thing to get even stronger from here on out. But hard to believe that it's already going to get much stronger here, especially given that we are basically already at record pace. And in fact, Alex Borham tweeted this earlier this morning. The Nino 3.4 has hit 2 degrees Celsius earlier than any other year, including 1997, which took until the end of August. However, RONI, the relative Nino index, shows isn't so far from the old records and is on track with 1997. But the key here is the fact that he mentions 1997 for most metrics, and obviously we all know the 1997 El Nino event was record. But at least with the current, raw sea surface temperature anomaly values, I mean, this is just incredible. The Nino 3.4, once again, the black line represents this year's value of the Nino 3.4, and it's astonishing in terms of how far above we are compared to all of these other years, and especially given that all these other years, like 1982, 97, 2015, were all record-breaking El Nino events. So they're the top El Nino events of the last 30 to 40 years, and this year already we are surpassing that, and perfectly in line, I should say, especially with the latest forecast from the climate models for July. And everyone has been talking about this, but it seems outlandish and it seems crazy, but going back to this graph here, with the fact that we are already well above pretty much all of the other strong El Nino years right now, I'd say honestly, this is not totally impossible, and that is the European here. First of all of the ensemble members now with the European seasonal for July above the 3 degrees Celsius threshold, and this is at least, of course, with the raw oceanic Nino index. So I pretty much say, you could pretty much say at this point that us reaching and probably, breaking above 3 degrees Celsius with this El Nino is very likely, in fact, almost a given at this point. But the amount of ensembles as well that actually push this basically towards above 4 degrees Celsius, already talking about 3 degrees Celsius, but 4 degrees Celsius, this would be quite a record-breaking, insane event. And the fact that a lot of the European ensembles hint that is quite astonishing. And I believe the actual mean from the European forecast for July is 3.9 degrees Celsius. So record-breaking El Nino, and as far as I'm concerned, this is an uptrend even more from last month. And once again, given the fact that we are already on record pace right now with the current daily Nino 3.4 sea surface temperature anomalies, maybe this isn't so far-fetched after all. Maybe we truly are looking at a once in a lifetime event with this El Nino, like the models show right now. But it's not just the European showing this. That's the thing. It's virtually all of the climate models now, especially with the NMME2. And this also was something that basically broke the internet. The NMME that came out for July too. This is the forecast for the El Nino by January of next year. And just look at that here, a pronounced massive tongue of 3 degrees Celsius anomalies stretching all the way from South America, stretching westward into the Central Pacific. I mean, when do you ever see this kind of warmth here? With the El Nino, you never see this kind of warmth here ever. With any given El Nino, even with a strong El Nino. So that's two models, the NMME and the Euro, both showing a strong El Nino, definitely more than likely reaching above 3 degrees Celsius. So this is quite an astonishing event coming forward. And the Climate Prediction Center is starting to catch up too with their latest July probability strengths. And first of all, quite astonishing for pretty much all of the forecast periods from now up until early next year, already indicating that we're going to get a strong El Nino. And by the way, these probabilities are based off of the relative Nino index, so this does not even take into account that the current raw, oceanic index is already at Super El Nino intensity. But even with the relative Nino index, by the time we get to later this year, especially the end of the year, for the OND period, so that's October, November, December, look at that. Already 80% chance of a Super El Nino being indicated according to the relative Nino index. And by that point, we will probably already be approaching 3 degrees Celsius, maybe even already there. So I think that just goes to show the certainty of how much of a high-end event we are seemingly already in the midst of at this point. And it just confirms everything that everyone has been saying since the start of the year. And I will say, the hype for this El Nino, in terms of it being a very strong event, has definitely showed itself to be justified. And what will that do in terms of the tropics? And I'm pretty sure a lot of people are now wondering, and I've already hinted that over the next several weeks here, especially in the Eastern Pacific, boy, are we about to see things become very active. But you're already seeing the impacts here right now across the tropics, especially in the Pacific. Already lots of activity out there. We had Typhoon Bavi. It's still a typhoon right now, but it's only down to a Category 1. But it was a very strong storm for a quite long while, for the last few days, to probably just beyond a week here in the Pacific. And that definitely helped produce a lot of ACE, and certainly became a very strong storm. Although it's recently kind of been collapsed by shear and eye wall replacement cycles that have failed to finish. But beyond that, way more opportunities coming here in the Pacific. We have 97W, 98W, and as I've mentioned before here, Invest 90C in the Central Pacific. So things are not only becoming active here in the Western Pacific, and probably will become active very soon in the Eastern Pacific, but we're also seeing development as well in the Central Pacific. And usually when you get development in the Central Pacific, that's how you really know that things are active in the Pacific right now. And I mean, it kind of is summed up perfectly as well by taking a look at this graph here. The current tropical weather bulletin for the Eastern Pacific from the National Hurricane Center. We now have 4 areas of interest here. We have the first one closer to the Eastern Pacific and closer to Mexico. This is probably going to develop sometime later this week into next week, or probably sometime this time next week. And this might be the first opportunity for a major hurricane here in the Eastern Pacific, so we'll have to watch that. 2 moderate chances in terms of development in the Central Pacific. One of them is Invest 90C, and in fact, the National Hurricane Center mentions it in the text bulletin. So this area here, Disturbance 1, is 90C. That has a 50% chance of development. So 50-50 in terms of development chances. I think it'll probably try to do something, especially given that we have a very strong El Nino year. The sky is the limit, in my opinion, this year for activity in the Eastern Pacific at this point. So if it's bound to happen, then maybe this will develop. But we also have another area here. And again, this just highlights the atmosphere now really beginning to respond to the fact that we have a very, very strong record-breaking El Nino. So all of this activity here is likely just the beginning, and we are probably going to be in for a very, very long few weeks here of constant and probably hyperactive periods of activity here in the Pacific, which are probably, again, just starting soon. And to close it off, I want to show you how things are going to pan out here over just the next week alone, using the GFS. And you can see, first off, we have this area here that's probably the 70% chance area that develops, and the GFS is pretty, adamant on this becoming a strong storm. Let's actually see how much of an intensity it shows. 958 millibars. So this might have the potential to be our first major hurricane in the Pacific. And then we have another piece of energy here in the Central Pacific. And let's actually switch over to the Central Pacific, and you can see multiple areas that develop. First of all, something here I believe that's probably 90. Actually, I think that's probably one of the Westpac invests. Very interesting how it's very close to the Central Pacific. So maybe if it was just a little bit further to the east here, it would be a Central Pacific storm. But then there's the other piece of energy here. That's probably 90C. And then there's obviously something else here that tries to get going too. And that actually becomes a pretty decently strong storm later down the line, according to the GFS. So in the very least here, in the Eastern and Central Pacific, 3 or 4 named storms coming up. Probably more, especially when you take it out to the next few weeks, as I'm pretty sure once this train of activity here starts, it's probably not going to stop. In fact, let's really quickly take a look at the model here, and you can see, yeah, it doesn't stop. We have one, and then another one, probably 10 to 12 days out, and then probably something else that'll get going beyond that. And I know that takes us out to 384 hours, but given the general pattern that is setting up, seems plausible to me. We're probably going to have a very, very active hurricane train set up here in the Eastern Pacific. And again, 3 or 4 named storms, probably at least 1 or 2 hurricanes, maybe 1 or both of them major hurricanes coming up here. And this is just the beginning. So make sure to saddle up, batten down the hatches, especially if you are in the Pacific, and keep a close eye here on the tropics very closely over the next few weeks. And as this El Nino continues to strengthen and approach record territory, as we are already doing so, things are only going to get more and more crazy. And we'll be covering it all here over the next few weeks, as I promise I always will do. And obviously we will continue to be covering the tropics here all the way until hurricane season is over. And of course, we will also be watching to see if and when the Atlantic decides to produce something as well. Something will happen at some point in the Atlantic. All the attention is on the Pacific right now, and rightfully so, given that that's where things are most favorable right now. But, we never have absolutely no named storms in the Atlantic. Something always comes along, and I'm pretty sure that will happen at some point sooner or later. With that being said, though, I'm going to wrap it up for today's video. I'm going to get this online, get this all out for you to watch. Hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, as I always say, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, especially if you want more of these videos. Again, they're coming on a daily basis. And also, if you want weekly live streams, which I do every Saturday, so tomorrow morning, you want to stay tuned for that as well, make sure to subscribe. And enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe, as I always say. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. I'll talk to you guys again tomorrow.